Today is Friday. It is November the 26th, the day after Thanksgiving here in the United States. And I am still on vacation. I ask you to forgive me for the glare, but my joy to be able to at least come to you with today's video devotional. Now, the title of this devotional is a dedication and a celebration. Our scripture reading is 1 Kings chapter 8 and 2 Chronicles chapter 5. Now, 1 Kings chapter 8, we have the dedication of the temple. And let me make a note before we really dive into today's study. You might wonder, why is this history so important? What could we possibly learn from a building that was dedicated 3,000 years ago in the time of Solomon? Well, there's much to be learned here, especially in the manner of worshiping the Lord, how we approach the Lord, the offer of sacrifices, the dedicating of the people themselves, as well as the dedication of the temple that is here, the presence of the Lord. All of these are things that you and I can take away from our study. And by the way, the New Testament that so many believers study and look to almost exclusively is without a foundation if we do not study and understand the Old Testament. And so I encourage you, don't overlook these studies that we have in 1 Kings, 2 Kings, 2 Chronicles now that we are studying, because they really are the basis and the foundation of so much that we embrace as 21st century believers. Now, back to the study. We have been following the building of the temple from its inception in the heart of King David, now to its construction fulfilled during the reign of his son, Solomon. The temple having been completed and all the necessary implements and utensils readied, the day came for dedicating the house of the Lord. Now, let me say this. We're not sure what year that might have been. Some would suggest that as soon as the building was finished, that it was dedicated. There are others that would suggest that many years passed while Solomon was also building his palace, that he finally came back and dedicated what you and I would refer to today maybe as the palace temple complex. Nevertheless, setting all that aside, let us consider 1 Kings chapter 8. In 1 Kings chapter 8, verses 1 through 4, the furnishings are being placed in the temple. The Ark of the Covenant has been carried up by the priest from David's palace complex where he had erected a tabernacle in that place. Well, with the sacrifices so great, they could not be numbered. The Ark was placed in the oracle, meaning the inner sanctuary of the temple you and I identify as the Holy of Holies. Well, the ark rested beneath the wings of the great cherubim that we have read about earlier, that Solomon had carved and prepared and then gilded in gold. And so we have the ark resting beneath the wings, the outstretched wings of the cherubim. Now, with the passing of the years, verse 9 of 1 Kings chapter 8 indicates that there was only one thing that was left in the ark itself, and of course it was the most treasured, and that was the 10 Commandments that we identify as God's covenant with his people. Now, we read in 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 10 through 11, that the glory of God filled the house of the Lord so much that the priest could not stand to minister. And I think that was probably because of the blindness of the Shekinah glory of God. Now, we might ask them, why were the priests unable to minister there? And I think it's because literally the glory of God, the holiness of God, filled the temple. We're reminded, Exodus 24 and verse 17, that the glory of God is a devouring fire. Deuteronomy chapter 4 and verse 24 says the glory of God is a consuming fire. You see, the Lord's presence in his temple was so powerful and convicting that the priests could not stand to minister. Now, the dedication of the temple continues in 1 Kings chapter 8, verses 12 through 21, as Solomon begins to rehearse how his father David had longed to build the temple, but God had forbidden him. You might remember God said of David, "What's in your heart is good. However, you are a bloody man." Solomon had been a man of war, or David rather, had been a man of war. Then, in the sight of all the people, we learn in verse 54 of 1 Kings 8 that Solomon kneeled. He prayed on his knees. Now we'll notice in tomorrow's devotional in 2 Chronicles 6 that Solomon had built a platform that was up higher above the people. And all the people could hear the king. They could see the king. They watched as the king knelt and prayed on his knees. And there in verses 22 through 30 of 1 Kings 8, Solomon offers a prayer of thanksgiving, remembering God's faithfulness to his covenant promises and praying for Israel. Now, Solomon, knowing the justice of God, confessed the bent of every man's heart was to depart from the law and the commandments. The king prayed that when Israel sinned as a nation, and that they would, that the Lord would not forsake his people forever. But when they cried out to him, he would hear the confession, and when they repented, he would forgive their sin. Now, knowing when the people disobeyed the Lord that troubles would befall the nation, and we see them described in verses 37 through 43 of 1 Kings chapter 8. It's described as famine, pestilence, and so many other afflictions, physical disasters, and blights upon their crops. Solomon petitioned that when that time came, that God would hear the prayers of every man. Should the people go to war and fall into captivity, Solomon prayed the Lord would hear the prayers of his people and restore them to their homeland. 1 Kings 8, 44 through 50. Remembering the mercies of God in the past, Solomon concluded his prayer, reminding the Lord that he had chosen Israel and had brought the people out of Egypt under Moses. Well, with the dedication of the temple being ended, Solomon blessed the people, led a celebration with sacrifices and offerings that continued 14 days. Now, 2 Chronicles 5 really is a parallel of what we've studied today, and it adds an element to the celebration and dedication of the temple, giving us the prominence of music in the worship of the Lord. Now, closing thoughts. Though we will not see the visible presence of the Lord's glory descending in a cloud upon our sanctuaries today, we who love the Lord should revere and glorify Him in both our private and our public worship. Now, our study of this time in Israel's history and the dedication of the temple will continue tomorrow when we study 2 Chronicles chapter 6. Again, don't be weary in studying this history. You're not going to remember everything that you're studying, but you are learning about that which is the foundation upon which the New Testament was also built. And so study the Word. Be a man, be a woman of the Word. Learn what you can as we go through this, being reminded that God was preparing His people ultimately for the coming of the Messiah, Jesus Christ. God bless. Have a great day, and bye-bye.